Welcome everybody back into Nerd Sesh. As always, I'm Carson Brever, and alongside me is Logan Camden. And today we are going to be breaking down the action that we just saw. We are also going to be previewing Nuggets Timberwolves, which should be a lot of fun. But before we get into any of that, Logan, how are you today, pal?
I'm doing fantastic. It was an electric day, man. How are you?
Oh, you don't need to ask me that. I just realized I never ask you how you are because I don't much care. But let's talk about the basketball because
You're
I
a
tell you one
dick.
thing that you're probably feeling good about. A James Harden disaster class, Logan. It's been what you've been praying on. We
No,
all know. Okay, well, it happened regardless. What do you take away from the Clippers getting just absolutely thrashed by Dallas on their home floor in Game 5?
I thought the Mavs played so much better, and I thought the Clippers shot pretty poorly. James Harden did play a really bad James Harden game. I want to say I haven't been praying on the Mavs' downfall. I want everybody to eat, but
Okay.
I was
Okay.
I
I
was
apologize.
waiting. I was waiting on one of these games, and of course, Carson, it comes right as you make a awesome video on Harden
Mhm.
praising him for being the best scorer in the playoffs. Couldn't have
Whoa, whoa,
timed
whoa,
it
whoa,
up
whoa, whoa,
better.
whoa, whoa, whoa. I didn't say that. I didn't say that.
I bet
I said he
it's
had
just
been the best player in the series, which
that's
he had. And now he is no longer.
Yeah, that's fair. They made life a lot harder on James Harden, and I want to give first and foremost a big shout out to the Mavericks defense for just playing so much better, man. Like I saw a team that was a lot more engaged, it wanted it a lot more, and I felt like you really saw the how much Dallas wanted it with how up tempo they went. Every time LA missed a shot, man, they were like bats out of hell on the break every single time down, man. They were trying to abuse this Clippers transition defense. Every missed shot, it was we're getting the ball, we are storming up court, and we are going to get a bucket. And they played a lot more up tempo. I thought that disrupted LA too. They played a lot more physical on James, and James also didn't consciously play like as good as he could have. And what I mean by that is I don't think he tried to get downhill as much in areas where he should have. I thought he settled a little too much. I didn't thought he playmaked okay, but uh, I thought Harden could have consciously attacked other mismatches a little more and played a little bit differently. But it's all about this Dallas defense, and it's about what Luka did today too. Finally stepping up to the task, knocking down shots, and a ton of lobs in this one, man. Oh my
Mhm.
gosh, Carson, they were abusing this LA defense over the top, man. Gafford, Lively, Derrick Jones has a big one in this one too. The Mavericks came out with a purpose in this one, man, and I think you finally saw a Clippers team that needed Kawhi Leonard. This is one of those games where they needed a guy like Kawhi. And the narrative through these first couple of games had been, oh man, I think the Clippers are better without Kawhi Leonard. They win 2 games without him, they lose
So
both with
silly.
him. And it's just a dumb narrative. This is the game where their shooting's off, PG and Harden are off. Terrence Mann and Zubats carry them through the first half, float them enough where they are still lingering around in this game. And it was on PG to Harden to step up in the second half. This is the one where I really thought it was evident that the Clips needed a healthy and 100% superstar Kawhi Leonard. He just wasn't out there, man.
Yeah, and without him on the floor, you just cannot afford a disaster class from James Harden like this. And this is ultimately why you need James Harden to be your third option at this stage in his career if you want to legitimately contend. And I did make a video today praising Harden because he had been absolutely incredible. You know, I'm not a Harden guy, Logan. We've discussed this many times. I wasn't as hard on him as you were, but he had been phenomenal. Like, just the level of shot making that he had put on display through 4 games was absolutely incredible. He was shooting 67% on step back jumpers. He hadn't missed a step back too. He was shooting 54% on floaters. But the concern that was always looming, the concern that I addressed even in this video praising him, was that there may be a clunker coming. Because what have we seen with James Harden over these last couple of years? He cannot get to the rim and he cannot finish around the rim. Last year, he was 15 of 39 in the restricted area in the playoffs. All of these long athletic teams, the Nets and the Celtics, they just swallowed him up there. In this series, he hadn't even tried it. He was 2 of 5 in the restricted area. And the Mavs made a very concerted effort to funnel him into help down the home stretch of last game. They said, we're not going to let you get to your pull-up and step-back threes. You're too good at them. You're not missing them right now. We are going to play in this aggressively staggered stance and mostly force you right, but regardless, force you into help. And we know that you're not going to challenge our bigs at the rim, so we're going to live with you taking floaters, which mathematically is the right play. Like generally, as a defense, you want to make teams live with those mid-range shots. Harden only shot 38% on floaters this regular season, but he wasn't missing them. He would not miss one last game. And that was ultimately what he had to sustain to avoid a clunker. And immediately you can just tell it is an entirely different dynamic in this game. Kyrie clamps him up on an early possession and he airballs a late shot clock three. Luka, who he was easily getting by off the bounce. And yes, Luka was willingly funneling him into help, but a reason for that is he couldn't just stay in front of him playing up that tight on him. Like he's actually competitive. He's forcing him into some tougher mid-range step backs. Derrick Jones Jr. blocked a step back. Also, you mentioned, Logan, that you were frustrated with the fact that as they were funneling him into help, trying to force him into his floaters in the home stretch of game 4, they didn't have a legit 5 on the floor. It was Maxi Kleber, who has played well in this series and was awesome today, but doesn't have the size and length to really challenge those shots at all. This game, it's a little bit different with Lively and Gafford out there. Those floaters are just a bit more contested. And again, there's just a natural variance. He's not always going to make all of those shots. They are tough shots. PJ Washington effectively applies some back pressure, blocks him with a rear view contest. Really, no Dallas defender affected him at all with back pressure in the last game. So immediately it was just this guy who had been totally comfortable, totally in rhythm, nails as a shot maker, starts missing his shots, and the defense is more physical, and they're just more engaged, and they're giving him fits. And then as the game goes along, Logan, he just fades. You have in the third quarter back-to-back possessions where he just flat up loses his handle, and this is the problem with 34-year-old James Harden. It is really fun that he can go on these incredible shot-making runs, but we saw it with Philly last year, man. He drops 40 3 times, and then what does he do on the flip side of that? In a majority of the games, he's just bad, right? He leaves you wanting so much more. I think he dropped 9 in the last game of the postseason last year. So it's just that volatility that is devastating. That shot variance is always going to swing back. That's the reality with Harden at this stage. And LA just needed him to be exceptional if they wanted a chance. And he had been, but this was ultimately coming.
And ultimately, when James Harden is going to be your number one of your offense and leading your guys out every time, you can play him a little bit different defensively. One, without Kawhi Leonard out there, you can put your team's best point of attack defender on him. And you can also just divert more attention that you would to another superstar, a PG or a Kawhi, to Harden. It just makes him a little easier to defend. And I thought the adjustments Dallas made tonight were really sound. Again, this is where you need Kawhi Leonard. Harden was great in this role all year long because he was the third guy and because he got single coverage every single time, and they had to pay attention to these other superstars. Like, it just made his job so much easier. And it's great that Harden can do this, but you really see his shortcomings as a basketball player tonight when Dallas does divert all that defensive attention to him, man. And the only way really to survive a bad James Harden game like that as your number one is either Paul George has got to go crazy like he did, or the Clippers got to hit a bunch of shots. There's a stretch in this game where they missed 14 straight threes. So you're down Kawhi Leonard. James Harden didn't doing jack. Paul George didn't doing jack. And your team, who is a primarily three-point dependent team, goes cold from behind the arc. It's just a recipe for a blowout, man. Like, credit to Dallas and the defensive adjustments they made. This team needs Kawhi to be a real contender, man. And I think that if Dallas comes out with this defensive scheme again, like I anticipate that James Harden will be better. I anticipate that Paul George will be better. I anticipate the Clippers shooting better. But without Kawhi Leonard and with Luka at this level, who I will give an immense amount of credit to, they said before the game started, Carson, he said, if this was a regular season basketball game, I would not be playing tonight. Like, the knee was bothering him that much. Apparently, he was a little sick too, like physically ill, not just ailed by these ailments, like actually sick. And he comes out tonight, 35 points, 7 rebounds, 10 assists, just 2 turnovers, and 14 to 26 from the field. And what I like too is, you know, he still shoots poorly from behind the arc. There's still possessions where he immediately gets into the step back three, but there's a lot more working to get downhill, getting into the mid-range. And what I really liked, Carson, was Luka's pace, man. He played controlled tonight. And I felt like in the last game, especially, Luka was sped up. He was out of rhythm. Nothing really felt like it was easy. And this one, I just liked how he played a little slower. Like, he just played a little more controlled, where the shots were coming to him and they were just a little more easy. If we get this level of Luka Doncic, man, I am confident that the Dallas Mavericks are going to finish this thing off without Kawhi Leonard. I just think there's a star difference. And again, the key thing is Dallas continuing to do these kind of defensive adjustments that they did in this one, man. It's a good dub. And again, without Kawhi, I just don't think the Clippers stand a chance against Luka in this level that the defense is playing at and the level that Luka's playing at.
This was by far the best game that we've gotten from Luka Doncic. He had been frustrating and he had been disappointing through the first 4 games. And we talked about how he was consistently settling for those tough jumpers and wasn't getting into the paint enough, wasn't pressuring the rim enough, which ultimately doesn't just make him a better scorer, a more efficient scorer. It also is going to make him the most effective he can be as a playmaker. He had only 7 restricted area makes coming into this game. And I believe I just looked at his shot chart. He had 5 in this game alone, and he had another 3 or 4 that were right on the outside of it. So we're talking short floaters. Like, that's it. That's the change. That's the Luka Doncic we've been waiting for. You get that Luka consistently. This is the Mavs team that we bought into down the stretch of the regular season. Because Kyrie didn't have a big game in this one, but he's been pretty damn good in this series. This team defense, there's been a bit of a bipolar aspect to it, as there has been with this whole Mavs team. But they've had some really impressive performances, and this was one of them. You just need Luka to be that top 3 guy, and then you're a threat to knock off just about anybody. You have a puncher's chance in a whole lot of these matchups at the very least, and you are one of the best teams out west. So I was just so happy to see that because he dominated a game while going 2 of 8 from 3. Like, his perimeter shot has been off in this series, but he's been so reliant on it to be able to control the game masterfully, to get to his spots at will, even when that shot still isn't falling. Like, that's all you need, man. And that was huge, I think, to see Luka Doncic at least deliver one performance like that and reinstill some confidence that he's going to be that player throughout this run, or that he at least has that in him.
100%. Doing this while you're not at 100% is super impressive. There's a lot of guys who aren't at 100% right now. Embiid, Tatum, Luka, Jamal Murray. Like, there's a lot of guys who have been struggling with being at 100%, and it is refreshing to see him at this level. Chat's getting on me for the Kleba burn. Yeah, man, Kleba played a good game, dude. I said
playoff Maxi.
And I want to be clear about something. I'm okay with Maxi Kleba 4 minutes. Like, if we can get him alongside another big where he can just sit in the corner, that's his spot, man. Maxi really likes that corner. He bangs. I think it was back-to-back-to-back 3. Did he go back-to-back-to-back-to-back? Did he hit 4 straight?
The 4th was later in the quarter, but he had 4 in that second quarter.
Yeah, 4 in the second quarter. He hits 3 back-to-back-to-back, and he's a versatile weapon, man. He's good in this series. A big physical guy who is decent on the perimeter, and he can space the floor. Like, I'll give Kleba his props for this game defensively and how he shot that pill. I want to be clear about something, though. I just don't like him at the 5 spot. I think the Mavs are so much better off with a Gafford or a Lively in terms of rim protection and a guy that's just always a threat for the defense on the back end where you can throw those lobs. So I'm glad they didn't turn to him for 5 minutes and they let him hold down the floor. But he played a good game. I call for less Kleba minutes, and he had a good one. So I props to Maxey. He was crucial. He was crucial in this one.
He was really good, and that's the thing with this Mavs team that we've talked about. They don't have the consistent high-end third guy that a lot of these other teams do. All of their role players have some volatility to them, but they have options. They have a bunch of athletes. They have a bunch of quality defenders. They have different looks with these big athletic 5s, or you can go small with Maxey at the 5, and he can at least physically, in terms of strength, hang, and he's super switchable. And when he's shooting well, he's just an impactful player. And I felt like you saw a lot of that good stuff come out from Dallas in this game. I want to give props to Derrick Jones Jr., who's played a few nice offensive games in this series and made several big plays with his length as a help defender in this game. As I mentioned, blocked Harden on the step back. And the defense has been really the strength of this Dallas team in this series so far. Like, even when they've had their bad first halves, like games 1 and 4, the offense has been more egregiously bad. And some of it has just been great shot making from PG and from James Harden. They have been a better defensive team than an offensive team so far. And to me, that's very encouraging. There's just so many quality defenders here. I thought Derrick Jones Jr. was awesome on Paul George. I thought that collective length of the 5s, but also the secondary rim protectors, the wings, was really good. And they just need to be consistent there. If they're consistent defensively, that is such an important foundational piece for this team. So it was a nice overall game from the Mavs. Both Gafford and Lively just have some awesome athletic moments in this game where you're just like, goodness, these guys are freak athletes. I do want to just shit on the Clippers a little bit more, though, even though I don't expect them to win without Kawhi Leonard on the floor. I didn't expect them to win this series with Kawhi Leonard, but this was really rough, and Harden was the worst in this game. But also Harden was the guy who overachieved the most through 4 games. Harden was the reason they were at 2 apiece. Harden had to step up from being the third option to the first option. I am ultimately more frustrated over the course of this series with Paul George. Even though he was awesome in game 4 too, he's just another guy who is so extremely reliant on the tough jumpers. And these are great jump shooters, but there's always volatility with that. And I thought he made a concerted effort at some points to actually get downhill in this game. But again, the Dallas length and athleticism in the interior was just giving him trouble. And it has throughout this series. He's been met at the rim on multiple occasions. So that sort of volatility from him on top of the clunker you get from Harden, it's just so frustrating. Like Paul George had 7 points 2 games ago. And now in this one, he hits 2 threes at the end of the third quarter when they're already down 20-something. Yippee, like he goes 4 of 13 with 15 points. It's just really disappointing from the both of them. You can't hate on them for being down 3-2 to this Dallas team without Kawhi on the floor. Like that is ultimately a fine result. But man, to just get humiliated like this and to have it be because of your star players, and that's ultimately a big difference. Like we talked about this series with Jason on Hoops Tonight a couple days ago. The Mavs role players hadn't always been super consistent offensively. The Clippers had some awesome shooting performances, but it comes down to who do you think in terms of these star duos is going to outplay the other? And it is confidently the Dallas Mavericks. And that's what happened clearly in this game. And that's what, if I had to guess, will happen in game 6.
And who's got a more reliable, consistent formula? You know, you talk about the volatility with Dallas too. I trust Dallas's defense a lot more than I trust the Clippers' overall defense. You know, that's a huge component. The jump shooting may vary game to game. It may wax and wane, but the Dallas defense is normally going to come to play and play hard, and their length can be this disruptive consistently. And I trust Luka and Kyrie straight up as offensive creators, both of them individually, more than I trust Harden or Paul George. You know, I just think Dallas has the more consistent formula. And I do think, too, that, I don't know, maybe a couple of moves on the margins that they made, like the trade with the 76ers. Like I was thinking out tonight when Amir Coffey was clanging threes, I was like, man, it'd be nice to have like a wing like Nick Batum or something out here tonight. Not that makes a complete difference in this series, but I do think their bench has been stretched a little more thin after making that deal. And that's ultimately it too. You know, when Kyrie and Luka are getting into the teeth of the defense and getting downhill, it's just more consistent, man. The Clippers are just way more jump shot reliable. That's why you have these massive beatdowns of Dallas when their jumpers are hidden. And then you can have these absolute duds of games. Live by the 3, you die by the 3, man. And I trust Dallas more defensively. I trust them to generate more easy buckets. And that's a huge component too, man. When the Clippers are settling for jumper after jumper, guess what? Dallas has got 3 freak athletes that are always rolling to the rim. And if you don't have your big man in the exact right spot, Luka and Kyrie can throw those passes all game long. I just think Dallas has a better formula, a better recipe, and easier avenues to winning defensively and offensively, man. I think Dallas is just a better team.
They're absolutely the better team. Without Kawhi on the floor, he is your offensive floor. He is the one dude who isn't going to pressure the rim, but will consistently impose himself physically, who you just trust to be awesome night after night. Like, he's the ultimate playoff riser, man. He gets to his spots, and he is incredibly consistent as a pull-up jump shooter, but also because he's not just relying on step-back threes, right? He's getting these short turnarounds, shooting over defenders who he's bullying to his spots. Without him, they're just outmatched, and they're relying on 2 guys who are too inconsistent. The last Clipper who I do want to hold accountable, criticize, is Russell Westbrook, who, of course, we know who he is at this stage in his career. But, man, this has been as brutal a series offensively as I can think of, Logan. And he's out there getting 21 minutes a night. He's shooting 25% from the field in this series overall. He's 6 of 35 over his last 4 games. And he's made his energy plays, and overall he's defended well in this series, but there's also a couple of ill-advised gambles, 2 inbounds. he tries to strip the big, and then he just ends up getting totally out of position. Daniel Gafford gets an easy drive with an expiring shot clock. It's like, dude, Daniel Gafford was about to catch that ball 30 feet away from the rim. Like, maybe just let that happen. Derrick Lively finds Klebo for a wide open three. Yes, there's energy and there's effort, but there's also been a lot of dumb shit, the ejection, some of just the non-basketball plays that we've seen. And then offensively, it's literally like, what do you do with this guy? Because he can't make a shot. He's obviously never going to be entrusted with like significant ball handling duties here just because of the fact that Harden and PG are out there. Like, yeah, he can push the tempo in spots, but a lot of the times in the half court, he's in the dunker spot. He's had a couple nice cuts this series, but that's clunky. He's catching the ball at the free throw line where he's just a total non-threat. It's just really, really rough. And I don't want to hyper focus on Russ because he ultimately is just a role player at this stage in his career, but he's still one of the aging quote unquote stars of this team. Just when you think about his stature as a name, and he's been so awful offensively.
I mean, Russ is a regular season hooper. And what I mean by that, especially in the context of this series, is the fact that he is unplayable alongside other guys that need the ball in their hands. Like, when he can play that 6-man role and take every possession with the ball in his hands and be responsible for creating off the bench, he's valuable. But that's what the difficulty is of having him in your roster, is when you get into the playoffs and you're, just inevitably going to have his minutes overlap with your superstars, he is a zero. And Russ is always one of those guys with the lack of awareness where they can't change their play style. He's not a jump shooter, so you're never going to respect him as a floor spacer or any jump shot he takes. A Russell Westbrook jump shot for the defense is a great possession, no matter where he is on the floor. And so then he's not going to set screens and roll to the basket. He's not always going to be cutting. He's not going to crash and do the little things. Like, it's just so easy as a player. I always thought the ideal spot for Russ, I never thought he should have left Washington. I thought that Washington was the perfect basketball, like, ending career spot for Russell Westbrook, where he could play out his days as the number one for a basketball team that didn't have a superstar, where he could win them 30 to 40 games every year. They'd be in the play-in. They'd be a fun team to watch, and he could be their star. And, I say star with quotations, but I mean, and you look at where the Wizards are now, they have no superstar. They have no identity. They have no leader. Like, and that I felt like that city loved him. I thought that, like, the city bought into Westbrook. And now you see Washington has no reason to go out and support the team, and they have nobody to watch for. Like, I thought that was his best destination, man. And of course, I think that's just the takeaway that we have to have. He's not meant to be a role player, man. He is not mentally, his style of play, his skill set, he's not meant to be a role player. And there are some guys who are going to age gracefully into this role. Ultimately, Russell was never going to be one of those guys, man. And he's just a tough guy to play alongside other stars or in the playoffs, man. That's the reality with Russ.
It is pretty funny how Kawhi has ultimately ended up on this team with two very significant playoff droppers in James Harden and Russell Westbrook, and PG, who has had a couple really good runs, but has also had some really bad runs. And overall, I think is another one of these guys who gets clowned on as generally not playing up to his level in the playoffs. And then Kawhi is like the ultimate playoff riser, but the guy can't even get out on the floor. This Clippers era, we are going to look back as some combination of one of the great what ifs and also just one of the great flat out disappointments. And I know everybody's instinct is always to clown on them because they're never deep in the playoffs. They're also never healthy, Logan. There was one year in 2020 where they blew that lead to the Nuggets. After that, 2021, they go to the Western Conference Finals without Kawhi. He's not available for those last two games against Utah. PG plays as well as he has outside of maybe that MVP caliber season, 2019 with OKC. He was playmaking, he was getting downhill, but you're not ultimately going to reach the finals or certainly win the title without Kawhi Leonard on the floor. 2022, they're ravaged by injuries. 2023, very hurt again, and Kawhi isn't on the floor. He gets hurt 2 games into that series, and now we see 2 games of a shell of Kawhi in this series. I have never loved the Clippers. I've ultimately consistently thought they're too jump shot reliant, the volatility that comes with that. They haven't reached the highest defensive ceilings. but they've played at a 56 win pace with Kawhi and PG on the floor together over 5 years, dude. Like they've consistently been really good and they've had one actual shot at it. And that does bum me out.
Bums me out too, man. It is going to be one of the best. It's going to be one of the greatest superstar what ifs, man. Up there with the Nets, up there with maybe the Suns team too. Like when we're looking back at this.
Hold on. I think it's totally different than the Nets because the Nets was a disastrous decision, and all of those guys were old and just not very good. This team has actually been really good. They just can't stay healthy.
No. I don't mean the PG Paul Pierce KG Nets. I mean the KD Kyrie Harden Nets.
Oh, my bad.
In terms of like,
Yes,
what could have been, and that's what's tough about this for the Clippers too, man, is they've always kind of been the little brother team in LA, but they've also been the team that is underachieved with great teams. This happened with CP, Blake, and DeAndre Jordan, man, where they got to the Western Conference. Did they ever get to the Western Conference Finals with that core? I thought the once, Clippers? Right? That CP, DJ, and Blake, they got once, right? And they lost.
No, they never made the Western Conference Finals.
Wow. So that win against the Spurs, that was a first round. I don't know. I remember they went 7 games when your CP hit that buzzer beater.
That was the thing. CP had never been in the conference finals until Houston.
And it sucks, man, because LA's just going to have to ride this one until the wheels fall off too, dude. The amount of capital that they have invested. And the other what if that comes into play here too that is going to sting the Clippers in the ass probably until he retires is the fact that they gave up SGA too in the Paul George trade, man. That's the one where it just hurts you, man. Clippers have gone all in on this one. They've got to sell tickets for their new stadium. They got to get people to show out. You're going to ride this one until the wheels fall off, man. And I'm just hoping that we can get one, like you said, dude, one playoff run where we don't have to go, what if? That's the thing with the Nets where none of those guys are healthy. They get close. One playoff run, man, and it's either gonna validate or completely invalidate this experiment. But they've invested way too many assets to turn back now, and they're kind of out of options, man. It's this core or bust, and it looks like we're very much headed towards bust, man.
Yeah, they've been all in, and at this point, I do think you ride it out and you go and debut the wall, and that's going to make all the Lakers fans, Clippers fans. I'm not even hating on that. I honestly really respect Steve Ballmer's energy. Like, I enjoy an owner who actually cares that much about his basketball team. I respect it, but this is just the ultimate Clippers fate. And I still think Kawhi is so great, and we just don't even get to see it in this run, and you can't even be surprised by it. You can't be surprised by any of this. The surprise was them being at 2-2. The surprise was James Harden playing out of his mind. When they go and they lay an egg, like, you're disappointed, but you ultimately can't be shocked. So are we in agreement that this series is effectively over? I don't see LA winning 2 in a row. I don't see them winning in Dallas. They could always have a crazy shooting game. We've seen that. That's how they win game 4. But I certainly wouldn't pick it. And I think Dallas has a much more solid foundation with potentially the 2 best players on the floor in any given game and the more consistent team defense.
Yeah, I mean, I wouldn't be completely shocked if the Clippers somehow – I would be pretty shocked. Like, it's going to take – there's just volatility. There's a lot of volatility in this series. Like, if we get a Luka stinker, Luka disappears, the Clippers shoot hot, Harden gets hot. Like, I could definitely see something weird happening, but I do think Dallas is just concretely – the better basketball team. And I would be surprised if they won it in Dallas, man. I think Dallas took a lot of momentum in this game. They found out a lot of stuff that worked with their adjustments, and I think they're going to win on their home floor. So, yeah, I wouldn't tuck in the Clippers, but, I'm getting a warm glass of milk ready, man.
Yeah, I think I'm bringing Goodnight Moon out, and I think maybe I'm at least turning the reading light on. We have the main lights off for the Clips. I don't really see it happening, but this has been a roller coaster of a series. It has been weird. Dallas is just better, though. Without Kawhi, they're simply the better team. All right, we're going to take a quick break. Then we're going to briefly talk Heat Celtics, but more importantly, we are going to be previewing Nuggets Timberwolves. So stick around for that after some quick words from DraftKings. The 82-game preseason is in the books, and it's finally time for the real season. Don't miss out on any of the NBA playoff action at DraftKings Sportsbook, an official sports betting partner of the NBA. From the play-in tournament through the finals, DraftKings Sportsbook has you covered with same-game parlays, live betting, odds boosts, and so much more.
Download the DraftKings Sportsbook app and use code NERDS. New customers bet $5 and get $200 in bonus bets instantly. That's code NERDS only on DraftKings. The crown is yours.
So, Logan, if the Lakers now have most competitive sweep and most competitive gentleman's sweep for consecutive years running, I think it's safe to say that Miami Heat have least competitive 5-game series. They got one, and it's just remarkable that they did. It took a really poor Celtics defensive effort and a phenomenal Heat shooting game, but this series was in the books from the start without Jimmy on the floor. Where does Miami go from here?
I think that's the big question. My take for a lot of teams too is, your foundation's good. You just retool around these guys, and the clock's ticking. It's officially on. Your superstar is Jimmy Butler, and Jimmy has dealt with a lot of injuries as he has gotten up here in age consistently, whether it's little stuff. There's a track record. There's a pattern here. And what I'm saying is that it's the burden that Jimmy has on him in the playoffs and how much he's going to have the ball in his hands. It's just going to be harder and harder for him to stay healthy and stay on the floor as he gets older. Like, Jimmy's getting up there in age, man. I know it's felt like Jimmy's such a youthful ball of energy, man, anytime he gets out there. But, Jimmy's going to be 35 next season. And that means you got to make the most of whatever you have left of Jimmy, man. You got to take that towel and you got to wring all the water out of it, man. You got to get every last drop of Jimmy Butler basketball that you can. And they've got a rock-solid foundation, man. I believe in Jimmy Butler and Bam Adebayo as the foundation of one of the league's best defenses. And Jimmy is a really good offensive creator. Like, Jimmy is one of the great playoff risers in NBA history. That's just a fact, right? I don't have to get into the minutia of that. Jimmy Butler is an all-time playoff riser, but you got to move fast. And they lost some big key playoff performers last year. I think that's been really noticeable too in this one series is, we can laugh. Oh man, Gabe Vincent's gone. Max Strus is gone. Those are valuable playoff performers. And especially in the Miami Heat context, just two guys who are really good pull-up three-point shooters, guys who are nails from behind the arc and as catching shooters. So that is the question. What do you do to build the best possible core? Well, there are some good things about this. Tyler Hero is not a number one. I think that's obvious. And a lot of people are taking the piss out on Tyler Hero right now. Like, guys, Tyler Hero's a number 3 or a number 4 on a good basketball team. Expecting him to create like this and have this huge burden on his shoulders is just ridiculous. Like, I'm not going to batter Tyler Hero for not performing like Jayson Tatum or Jokic in these plays. It's not what Tyler Hero is, man. He's a number 3 or a number 4. And the good thing is you have two pretty good perimeter creators, Hero and Rozier. But I am looking for a next level shot creator. If there's another guy that the Miami Heat can get that is an upgrade from Hero or from a Terry Rozier, I'm going to make a move on one of those guys. I don't know who it could possibly be or who would potentially become available. If there is a all-star caliber point guard or perimeter creator or sub all-star perimeter creator, I'm going to pull the trigger and I'm going to do it. And if that requires me getting rid of Tyler Hero or Terry Rozier or one of these young wings, I'm probably going to pull the trigger. If it can raise my ceiling, like I said, man, Jimmy Butler's 35 years old. Bam Adebayo is not getting any younger. You got to go all in on this core right now, man. You can take notes from Carson. We talked about this all year long about how the Golden State Warriors didn't capitalize on another year of Stephen Curry, of Draymond Green, of this core. Mm-hmm. And I think a lot of teams should take very big notes from that, is the fact that you just cannot take these years for granted, and you got to make the most of it. I don't know what the Miami Heat look like Jimmy Butler, post-Jimmy Butler, post-Bam Adebayo. Neither do the Miami Heat. And that is why it is important that you take the young assets that you do have and you go all in on this core and you figure out the rebuild and everything else later, man. It's going to be okay. And if you got to suck for a little while, it's okay, man. Every team goes through it, man. You're going to be in the gutter every once in a while. It's just what happens in basketball. So that's what's important, man. If it takes giving up some of these young assets to go out and get that third guy, I think you go and do it. So that's step one, in my opinion, is finding that third guy. And if you believe it's Tyler Hero, okay, then let it be Tyler Hero and pray for healthiness. And you add athleticism, size, and big physical guys around them. I think that's probably the biggest area where I thought Miami really lacks is I think they need more athletes. They need more big physical guys that can play defense on the wings. And if you can add shooting, you add shooting. But they've got the foundation, Carson. I think it's more about a decision of what Miami's going to do. I don't think you can stand pat this offseason and just run back what you have. Because ultimately, with the Boston Celtics, you just don't have enough firepower to knock them off. And that ultimately is the goal, is to get to the finals. And if that star is on the table, that all-star or sub-all-star caliber player, if I'm Miami, I'm going to put in my young assets and make a move on that guy to raise my ceiling.
Well, that's why I felt that missing out on the Dame trade was devastating. Like, you say the Heat have the foundation, and they have the foundation of a playoff team that sucks to face. I don't want to downplay what Jimmy and Bam have done with 3 Eastern Conference Finals appearances in the last 5 years now, but I also don't believe it is the most replicable formula when you are just as labored for half-court offense as they are. And Jimmy obviously makes them a better offense, but with him, they were a bad regular season offense last year. They were a bad regular season offense this year. Like, somebody who can just give you easy offense, a dynamic perimeter shot maker would be so valuable here. And I think that they should go fishing for some big stars, dude. Bring back LeBron. Why not? Wouldn't that be great? I legitimately do wonder. We're talking about the Clippers, and if they keep things in place, we'll have that full conversation for them when it's official Clippers funeral time. But I wonder if Paul George actually becomes a free agent this year. And if they could get PG, like, I think that that's a good fit, right? That's a guy who is long, who can defend, who does add size, who is a dynamic perimeter shot maker. And you just need him to be your number 2. So it's not like he has a super consistent load that he has to carry. And then ideally the team defense is a foundation. And I would be willing to move off of the Hero and Rozier contracts. My guess is that Miami will probably stand pat just because they didn't get to see things play out. When I say stand pat, I mean not go in on a sort of big star splashy move like what I think they should to raise their ceiling, because Jimmy's 34. Like, if you want to make the most of this window around him, you just need more high-end offensive pop. But they didn't see Rozier in this playoff series. They didn't see Jimmy. And my guess is because of that, we'll say, we don't even really know what we look like, and it would be foolish to give up on this vision. But I'm ultimately not optimistic that that's enough when you're talking about hanging with the big dogs out east.
Can I throw a couple of guys out at you and you tell me
Yes.
if you think, 1, they're feasible, and then 2, if you really think that they're impactful enough to chase? So the first guy, Zach LaVine.
I thought about LaVine. I would probably not do a Zach LaVine trade, although the Heat are one of the rare situations where I would consider it, because I think they check so many boxes defensively, and in terms of having the 2 guys, they just need another high-end shot maker offensively. That contract sucks, though, and I think that contract could feel very Bradley Beal-like in a year or 2, if it doesn't already. I think it's already a bad contract, and if you're having to give up Hero, I don't know. I don't love Hero, but at least he is a very good offensive player on a manageable, like $30 million a year contract instead of aging Zach LaVine coming off a season-ending injury on $50 million. So it definitely wouldn't be my first choice, and I probably wouldn't do it.
What about Mikal Bridges?
That's interesting. That I like more, and he definitely fits into the defensive identity, and you're adding length on the wings. He is an inferior offensive player, though, and I think the limitations that he has offensively just as a self-creator are pretty clear, but I also think that he fits in nicely when he is in more of a secondary or tertiary role with his cutting, with his spot-up shooting. So I like that. I would probably try to swing a little bit bigger first, and if you were to get a PG, right, anything like that would have to be a sign and trade if you're talking about a free agent, because you just don't have the cap to do that outright. Mikal is interesting.
What about Garland or Mitchell if they became available?
Donovan Mitchell, 1,000%. I would do that. Darius Garland, I would probably do, depending on the value, although I have been very concerned by his level this year, as we've talked about. Mitchell to me would be perfect. It's like now you're talking about he and Jimmy can trade off as your offensive number ones, because when you have those second tier guys, like that's probably what you need. If you actually want to get over the hump, you need guys who can rotate being your number one, like even PG and Harden, right? They're just not quite at that level when Kawhi isn't out there on the floor. I think Jimmy and Mitchell would be. And when Donovan Mitchell wants to defend, he can defend capably. I like that.
What about any of the Suns' big three, Book, Beal, or KD?
Bradley Beal is going to be a no for me. The other two, I don't know that Miami has the assets to get either one. And that's the problem with a Mitchell trade. That was the problem with the Dame trade. Now you've raised Hawkes' value. You've raised Jovic's value. So maybe there's more intrigue in that. They just don't have many picks to give out. KD would probably be more feasible just because of his age. He's a less appealing asset, but I don't think Phoenix is like, yeah, let's take on young, promising guys. So I just don't think that one is doable.
Okay, I got a few more guys here. What about Trae Young or DeJounte Murray?
I would definitely be in on Trae. Again, it's just like that sort of offensive pop, a guy who can be your offensive number one. The problem with all of these, the more that I think about it, is just having the package. And that's where it's like easier to go for a tier 2 guy or a tier 3 guy who is also older, so they don't have that long-term value. That's where a PG, it's like you don't have to sell the farm because the guy's in his mid-30s.
All right, this might be my last one unless I think anybody else. What about like a CJ McCollum or a Brandon Ingram?
That's interesting. I don't think either of those guys put you over the top. So I would not be willing to give up super significant assets. And I think with both those guys, you're adding a dimension of mad defense. And really what I want is, again, easy offense that can come in droves. Like Donovan Mitchell gives me dynamic pull-up shooting from beyond the arc, and he has the athleticism. CJ and BI are tough shot makers. And you already have like guys who can get you tough buckets with Jimmy and with Bam in spots. So I ultimately think they probably don't make enough of a difference, and I would rather just have really, really good role players.
If they don't go out and get that superstar, say they get a couple other perimeter shot creators like behind, or maybe just one solid one behind Hero and Rozier off the bench. You know, say they add some athletic pop and some wings, another backup five. Do they change their ceiling for you at all, or do you just still think they're in that tier 2 or 3 out east?
They'll be good. That wouldn't really change my outlook. To me, until they have another really high-end offensive player, you're not replicating last year's run. You're not shooting 45 and 49% from three on crazy volume to pull off these upsets. And that's what they were. They were really improbable upsets. So I respect their playoff formula. I also think there are just talent limitations here that put them below the top dogs pretty solidly. So I would be willing to take some big swings. And I don't think that Miami is opposed to that. I just wonder again if they're like, we didn't even really get to see our vision for this team. But your window with Jimmy isn't that much longer. And if you think he's a guy who like you can win a title around, you've been to 2 finals, I think it would take a hell of a team and him playing at a hell of a level, probably above his normal means, for you to win a title with Jimmy Butler. I don't know. And I think he took a little bit of a step back this year, but at least you can put a really good basketball team around this core if you do add another really high-end offensive player. Flip side of this, Logan, any quick takeaways from the Celtics for just taking care of business in this series?
Yeah, I mean, my one takeaway would be that, you know, we talked a lot about last episode about how the outlook changes for the Celtics with Kristaps Porzingis, and I do think that it opens the door a little bit for a Knicks or a Sixers legitimate finals run. When I say that it opened the door a little bit too, though, I want to address the counter argument of that, which is that, you know, Boston still has an abundance of just great players that can be the best player on the court in any given game. If it's Jaylen Brown, if it's Derrick White, if it's Drew Holiday, like, yeah, I think they lost their second best player in Kristaps Porzingis, and they said he's going to miss several games with this injury. the Celtics still are built to withstand an injury to a superstar, unlike any other team in the NBA, because they have so many quality basketball players. And the guy that I want to give a big shout out to in this series is just Derrick White. I mean, what a series. 22 points per game on, I think, 74% true shooting. Just, what the heck, man?
Yeah.
The fact that that guy can come out here and do this for your franchise and you don't have to ask the other guys to do a whole lot, it's really impressive, man. I'm not going to take too many big concrete things away from this because I just think Boston is so absurdly so much better than Miami. Like, it's not close, but
Yeah.
Boston still has an abundance of great players, and we can't take that for granted. I think they need Porzingis to beat the Nuggets, but this team can definitely still get to the finals without Porzingis too. You know, the gap is closed between Philadelphia and New York and Boston, but there is still a gap between those teams in Boston.
Absolutely. They're 21-4 without KP this year. I think that there's a very solid gap. Their top four guys are still all so damn good. And Derrick White is the hero of this series. They are going to wax either the Cavs or the Magic. The one quick thing that I will say is that Jayson Tatum was not very good in this series. And it didn't really matter because they were so much better. But it is funny to me. I was just thinking about the framing of things because a lot of people were getting on me for saying before the year that I would take Book over Tatum, which I had already flipped on by the end of the year when we did our top 10 players. I think Tatum improved, and I think that was a bad take by me before the year. But it is funny that it's like Book ends up averaging 28 a night on like 65% true shooting against the best defense in the league. Not to say he was good. Those numbers are juiced by game 4, but he did go crazy in game 4. Whereas Tatum just gives you 22 a night on 56% true shooting against the Heat team down their best player.
Oh, no, you don't,
because they win, because they're so much better.
He sacrifices so much for this team, Carson.
He sacrifices so much for the team. No, you're right. I should have thought about that. And of course, I'm not saying that this is the be all end all. I absolutely expect Tatum to play better. I absolutely expect him to be the best player on a team in the finals. This just wasn't good. It was a really rough jump shooting series. I didn't think that he consistently pressured the rim enough. I thought that he settled some, and those are the frustrations that you can have with him from time to time. It's not a real meaningful takeaway, but they just have to click into gear. Like, the Celtics didn't play their best in this series, and they were just so much better that they were able to dominate. I just want to see the consistent juggernaut Celtics that we know are out there. And part of that is Tatum playing at a consistent superstar level. And the other big part is, of course, KP being healthy, which I really hope he is, because I want to see the Celtics in the finals with their best chance to win a title with this core. All right, Logan. Well, we talk about the Celtics potentially making the finals. In my opinion, they're probably going to face whoever comes out of this matchup. Let's talk Nuggets Timberwolves. I have a whole lot of thoughts about this series. I am so excited. I do think these are the two best teams out west. What's your first key here?
My first key is, I think it's an obvious one for this series. How much can this elite Minnesota defense really disrupt the Denver offense? I mean, it is a battle of the Titans that we are about to get into in this series. I have not been this excited for a playoff series this year, maybe in my life, man. I mean, Knicks Sixers has been good. We got some good ones last year. I'm gassed up on this series, man. I'm so fired up. And I know the Thunder, the Magic, the Celtics, and the Cavaliers, they all have a better playoff defensive rating than the Timberwolves right now, but the Thunder got to play the Pelicans, the Magic and Cavs negate each other, and then the Celtics got to play the Heat. Like, I think it's obvious that the Timberwolves have the playoffs' best remaining defense, and it's important to recognize how much they crushed the Suns' offense in round one. Like, they wrecked them. The Suns posted an offensive rating of 109.3 in round one versus the Timberwolves. The Suns were the number 10 regular season offense in basketball. They had an offensive rating of 116.8. The Timberwolves held them 7.5 points below their regular season offensive rating. Like, you're taking a team that was number 10 in offensive rating and you turn them into the number 26 offense in basketball. That's equivalent to the Spurs, for context. Like, that's ridiculous. And on the flip side of that, they posted the number 1 offensive rating of any team in the playoff field, 123.2 offensive rating against Phoenix. And in the regular season, these two teams split the regular season matchups 2-2. The Timberwolves have an offensive rating of 116.3 in that and they post a defensive rating of 110.5. Like, that's remarkable to hold the Denver Nuggets to that. That's also with Karl-Anthony Towns also only playing one regular season game against this group. He's going to be huge in this series. So to me, the big key is how do they defend Nikola Jokic and how do they defend Jamal Murray? It's a big key against the Lakers. I think it's a big key against Denver, or excuse me, against Minnesota. I don't think there's an answer for Nikola Jokic. I think all the looks that Minnesota threw at Jokic in the regular season, I don't really think it matters. Jokic versus Reed with Gobert on help side. Jokic versus Gobert straight up. Jokic versus Gobert with Reed help side. Jokic versus Anderson with Gobert help side. Like, I don't really think there's a whole lot that Minnesota can do to slow down Jokic. I think you give him a lot of attention. You try to get the ball out of his hands as much as possible, and you try to get the other guys to kill you. What sucks about that is that Denver has an elite shooting supporting cast, and they have Jamal Murray, who's an absolute monster. But I think they can disrupt Jamal a little more, man. Jamal didn't play a great series in the first round against Los Angeles. It was pretty poor. And in the regular season, by his standards, like, he has obviously the clutch huge stretches. He has the 2-game winners, but consistently quarter to quarter, Jamal was not himself. And he struggled in the regular season to create for himself in isolation. The length was really disruptive against Jamal. And so I think a big key in this series for Denver is I am just running a ton of screens for Jamal in this series. If it's triple screens at the top, if it's double, I am trying to create Jamal as much separation to the perimeter as possible to give him space. And with that space, just see if he can create something for himself. But it's going to be hard. McDaniels is the guy that I would throw on Jamal all series long. One of the best perimeter defenders in basketball. And you can do that because the rest of the guys can't create as much, right? We'll figure out how we defend MPJ. He's probably going to eat. We'll figure it out against KCP. But I want my best point of attack guy on Jamal all series long, and I want to see if he can legitimately disrupt him. And then on the flip side of that, if I'm Minnesota, I am running Jamal Murray off that line as much as possible, dude. I am funneling him inside where our length can be disruptive. If that's McDaniels getting his hand into lanes, if that's Naz Reid, if that's Rudy Gobert, if that's Kyle Anderson, if that's NAW, whoever, we're going to funnel him off the line and we're going to help on shots on the inside. So I think those are the keys, man. Really, like, I know it's stating the obvious, but it's how you defend Nikola Jokic and Jamal Murray, the best duo in all of basketball. And so, again, to restate, I am trying to get the ball out of Jokic's hands as much as possible, and I'm trying to run Jamal off the line and make our length disruptive, man. It's the hardest question to answer in all of the playoffs. There's no easy answer, right? Like, it's difficult. That's why the Nuggets are who they are, because they have the best duo in basketball. And so that's the biggest key to me. Can the best defense in basketball slow down the best offensive duo in all of basketball?
This Timberwolves defense is special. I've said it. I think it's the best defense of the last decade. They just have absolute studs everywhere. I think they have the best perimeter defense personnel in the NBA right now. I think they have 3 of the 15 best perimeter defenders on the planet. And then they also have the best interior defender on the planet in Rudy Gobert. And they have another really physical, big rebounding force in Karl-Anthony Towns, who is particularly important in this matchup, Logan, because you say you think it doesn't really matter. This is the one matchup where I disagree. Do I expect Jokic to dominate offensively? Yes, because he does that regardless. He's the best offensive player ever. But Minnesota is the one team that I think can legitimately take a chunk out of his efficiency in a way that nobody else can. Through the playoffs last year, he averaged 26.2 points per game against the T-Wolves on 57.5% true shooting. Against everybody else, he averaged 33 a night on 68% true shooting. Nobody guards him better in the NBA than Minnesota. I don't even think it's a question. And there's a couple big reasons for that. Number one, Gobert is as good as anybody on him in single coverage. And we've seen he's just such an unstoppable post scorer that nobody is really able to throw him off his game there. But if anybody can hold up on single possessions, if anybody can block a shot with their length, it's Rudy Gobert. But to me, the real weapon that is most impactful and something that Minnesota turned to a lot in this series last year is the fact that Karl-Anthony Towns guards Jokic better than most teams' best option. He is so huge. He has been so physical in this matchup. He's so long that he is able to hold up on those single coverage post-up possessions really quite well. Again, Jokic is exceptional against anybody. He's going to win out. But when you can put somebody other than by far your most impactful help defender on Jokic and you're not losing much there, that is when Gobert can act as a full-time helper, which means he is the all-time rim deterrent that we know him to be for everybody other than Jokic. It also means that he can affect some of those interior passes to Aaron Gordon, and he can deter cutters. He can help on some of those Jokic attempts when he comes over and tries to shoot a hook, like Rudy can be there as an imposing presence. So it's what the Lakers have tried to replicate with Rui, but it just doesn't work because Rui can't hold a candle to Jokic. He has no prayer in single coverage. There's no resistance. It's literally layups. Same goes for Naz Reid. Same goes for Kyle Anderson. Like, it can't be anybody but Cat because the Timberwolves play two centers. They play two big-ass centers. But that look, I do think, gives Jokic more trouble than anybody else. Ultimately, he was still great in this series last year. He had one really rough shooting game that hurt his efficiency where he went 9 of 29. The Nuggets still produced really good offense because they're one of the best offenses ever with the best offensive player ever. But if anybody can make this ugly, and if anybody can take a chunk out of their offensive efficiency, it is the Minnesota Timberwolves because they also are really well built to guard Jamal. And we need Jamal to be better, just flat out. The guy averaged 23 a night on 47% true shooting versus the Lakers. That's just not going to cut it. And you talk about the impact of the length. That's where he struggled versus Minnesota this year. He gave him 17 a night, shot only 40% on twos. And he had a really good series against Minnesota last year, but that's without Jaden McDaniels, so that's different. And he will be the primary matchup in this series. There's no question about that. That's who they've put on him for all of the regular season matchups. And Jaden does a great job. That length, that back pressure is super annoying for Jamal. And you can funnel him into Gobert, and that is challenging. And it's very difficult for him to finish inside in this matchup. I also wonder, though, how much they throw Ant at him, because I think Ant presents a very interesting dynamic in terms of physicality. Jaden has the size and the length, but Ant has the strength to apply that ball pressure and just to give Jamal bumps and bruises. And the other advantage there is you have a taller, longer defender on MPJ. MPJ is basically unaffected by contests, but Jaden McDaniels is 6'9" with a 7-foot wingspan. Like, he's just bigger and longer than Anthony Edwards. And so he is able to provide more of a legitimate contest, at least in those spots. I do think that they'll put McDaniels on Jamal as the prime matchup this series. But the beauty is they can easily switch, obviously, anytime Anthony Edwards or Nickeil Alexander-Walker's on the floor, and they have a great option no matter what. And I particularly think Jokic being effective as a pick and popper is going to be pretty key to the effectiveness of their two-man game when Gobert is on him. When Cat is on him, it doesn't matter as much because Gobert is going to be in that roamer rim protector role no matter what. But when Gobert is on Jokic, it's so crucial that Jokic draws him out of the paint, or if he doesn't, he's able to consistently punish him with those pick and pop jumpers, because that's where we saw Jamal have success as a driver against Anthony Davis. It's when Jokic pops and now AD has to take a step out to the free throw line. Jamal hits you with that nasty hesitation dribble. He's patient, and then he turns the corner and he gets downhill. When his pull-up jumper is off, as it was through a lot of that Lakers series, like, that gives him a valuable floor that he doesn't always have. And if Rudy Gobert is parked around the rim, he doesn't have that ceiling. So for that reason, I also think it's valuable for Minnesota to have Cat on that Jokic matchup, because it doesn't matter if you draw Cat out to the perimeter. You're totally fine with that. So it is a really significant challenge. Ultimately, I think this is the best offensive duo on the planet. This is the best offense on the planet. I expect them to figure it out enough. But this Minnesota defense is special, and they're particularly well built to challenge this Denver offense.
Yeah, you've talked me into it a little bit, man. There is really nobody better that can match up against these two stars. Like a guy you didn't even mention, McDaniels and Ant, great answers for Jamal Murray. I mean, if Mike Conley's getting beat out there and you need to go with a full defensive 5 too, dude, you could even throw like Nickeil Alexander-Walker down there, and you just have insane length and so much depth to throw it. Like, you've got 3 legitimate guys you can throw it Jamal. You got 2 legitimate guys you can throw at Jokic. Nobody else in the NBA can say that. Like, their length really could be disruptive. The one area that scares me about Karl-Anthony Towns in this series specifically is his foul trouble. And that's where I'm worried about. If Jokic can get him in foul trouble a lot, and I found a number pretty ridiculous. had a great series in round one, right? 19, 10, and 3 on 53, 53, 89 splits. Nobody can guard him in Phoenix. You had 4.3 fouls per game in that series. That's against, guys that don't, get guys in foul trouble. Jokic is a guy that legitimately can with his physicality. And then 2, on his career, Karl-Anthony Towns averages 3.9 fouls per playoff game.
Yeah.
Carson, since the merger, that's tied 20th highest, like point blank period. And Cat is like one of the only guys in the 21st century on that list. Like the majority of that list is guys from the 90s and 80s when the game is so much more physical. They're calling more fouls. Like Cat sticks out like a sore thumb on that list, dude. And my one concern about him, because I think he's the X factor in this series, I think he's got to pull his weight offensively, and I think he has to do a hell of a job of locking up Jokic, doing his best on Jokic
challenging,
defensively. Yes. I think Cat is the X factor in this series, and it scares me that I think Jokic could maybe get him in foul trouble and get him off the floor.
Cat is definitely important in this series. We just got the best version of him that we've seen in the playoffs, and that's even with the fact that he was in a lot of foul trouble, and it's frustrating, and you only get 28 minutes a game. When he was on the floor, though, he was really effectively mismatch attacking. He was shooting the hell out of the ball. He wasn't turning it over recklessly like he has in previous runs, only 2.2 turnovers per 36 minutes, and he scored 25 points per 36 on 68% true shooting. Simply put, the Suns were just way too small and way too slight, and he was getting what he wanted against those guys. That's a very different dynamic here because this is a Denver team that is huge, and specifically, Aaron Gordon is going to guard him much better than any Sun did because Cat relies on that mismatch attacking. He is not an overly skilled post scorer. He relies on bullying dudes, and when he's coming downhill, he can get out of control on those drives if you can physically match up to him, and he might pick up his dribble too early or settle for a really tough floater. Aaron Gordon is much better equipped to force him into those tough shots than any Phoenix Sun was. Last year in this series, it's a small sample size, of course, but Cat only averaged 0.82 points per isolation and 0.87 points per post-up. So his self-created offense was very inefficient, and he averaged a lot of turnovers, and he averaged a lot of fouls. And I think you're absolutely right. That's the challenge. And they're absolutely going to go back between Gobert on Jokic and Cat on Jokic. I think we'll see heavy distribution of both, but they need him to be available on the floor. He could get into foul trouble in that matchup if he's not careful. And so I worry about him being a super consistent second source of offense because the matchup is just so much tougher. I really felt confident that if he could stay on the floor against the Suns, he was just going to dominate offensively. Ant hyped him up, bro. I loved that presser where he was just telling him, just fucking stay out of foul trouble. When you're on the court, you're unstoppable. It's not as true in this matchup. I think there's a lot more potential for a Cat struggle than there was against Phoenix.
I think so too. Real quick about Ant. Bro, I love how much of a leader at a young age Anthony Edwards is. Like, I think that's a huge factor that a lot of teams don't have, man. Yeah. Ant is a vocal leader. He is a mentality changer. And I just love that anytime he's out there on the court, man, he's talking guys up. He is telling them what we need to do, what we need to execute. Like, he's got that mentality, and he's just a great team leader. To see this guy so young, communicating like this, getting these guys rallied up and fired up, it's really impressive, man. And it makes me believe a little more in Ant as a leader of this team and as a superstar. And talk about Cat being a consistent secondary source of offense. The guy who's got to be the primary source of offense for Minnesota is Anthony Edwards. And I think he is a huge X factor in this series as well. I don't think Denver has a ton of perimeter personnel they can throw at him that is going to stop him. We saw a lot of different looks in the regular season with Ant, man. If it was MPJ, if it was KCP, if it was Gordon. I mean, and there's some games too where, the Minnesota changes to like a 2-3 zone against Ant in Minnesota. My conclusion, I don't think anybody can guard or stay in front of Anthony Edwards. That's my take. I think he's going to get whatever he wants. I think kind of like Jokic, it's going to be forcing him into shots that he doesn't want to take, playing him physical, and just trying to throwing him off like a little of his game. I want to force him to settle for jump shots and hope he doesn't hit them, basically. I'm swarming Ant. I'm playing him super physically. And out of pick and roll, I'm going to throw him a ton of different looks. And I want him to make him kill me as a playmaker than as a scorer, right? I'm not always going to throw doubles at him like Phoenix was doing, but I'm going to strategically throw doubles, vary up my coverages against Ant. Because I think one-on-one, man, I don't really think there's anybody that can hang with him defensively. I think Gordon's a good matchup, but I still think Gordon's just got that speed,
It's going to be
explosiveness
KCP.
advantage.
It's going to be KCP.
That's tough. That's tough, man.
I think he's a better matchup than Gordon, but it is tough. I mean, KCP can hold up against bigger dudes, dude. Like, I don't want to downplay how great of a defender he is. He held up relatively well against LeBron freaking James, who we know is bigger and even stronger than Ant. But it is true. There have been moments. I went back and rewatched all of the regular season meetings between these two teams. Like, Ant can just go through him sometimes. He's just such a freak athlete. But KCP is a lot better than anything Phoenix had to offer. I will say that.
For sure. And on the flip side of that, what I'm doing if I'm Minnesota is I'm giving Ant a lot of high volume, high pick and roll involving Jokic too, outside of, just giving Ant straight up isolations. I want to see if Ant can get that pull-up jumper going in the mid-range. But you hit on a key point there against KCP, Carson, is Ant has these traits that are just so reliable for a playoff setting, specifically the athleticism, like the explosiveness. You just have to be such an elite isolation defender to stay in front of the guy. There's very few guys in the league that can. That strength is a huge component. Like, Ant is just going to go through your chest sometimes, man, and just get by you. And I think his decision-making is pretty reliable for how young he is. You mentioned it in the Phoenix series. There are plays where he makes a boneheaded decision or two, and I'm going to test him. If I'm Denver in this series, a young guy, I am testing him as much as possible with his decision-making, although I do trust Ant. I think he's grown a lot there. The one thing that's concrete with Ant, in my opinion, is that he is a playoff riser. This guy's a dog. He's an assassin. I mean that with like my whole chest. This kid is an assassin. He is a killer. Round 1 versus Phoenix, 31-8-6 on 65% true shooting with 2 steals a game. You mentioned it's not against great perimeter defense, but this has kind of been consistent. Like, in his playoff career, in most games, like, Ant has just performed better. His career playoff stats, he averages 5 more points per game on 3.4% better from the field and 4% better from deep. Statistically, he's just been better. And that's my big question mark with Ant, Carson, is what do we get out of him pull-up wise? That's the big swing factor for me, and how much of a factor. And if Ant is going to be the best player in this series or, second best, this is pull-up jump shooting. In the regular season, he's got 36.
Whoa.
I don't know, man. I don't know, man. I got
pretty crazy, bro.
I got big expectations for Ant. I don't expect
Jokic is playing a level above everybody on the planet, man. I don't know.
That's true. He's the best player he's the best player in the world. But do you think Ant's been the second best player in these playoffs?
Well, 4 games.
I mean, it's a small sample size.
4 games. Like, I get that it's 4 playoff games. Of course, it means more. But it is still 4 games.
But could he be the second best player in this series? Definitely.
I fully expect him to. If he's not, Minnesota's going to get worked. They need him to be a superstar.
Yeah, they do. And in round 1, that's exactly what he was. He was up 10% on his pull-up jumpers from the regular season. He was up 5% on pull-up threes from the regular season. Like, he just does it. I think Denver can make life harder on him, man. But I do think Ant's going to step up his game a little more. Like, I'm expecting minimum, 28 points per game very, very efficiently. Is it going to be enough? I don't know. That's really up to Minnesota's defense to decide and how much they can disrupt Denver on the other end. But I'm expecting very big things from Anthony Edwards, Carson. To me, the swing factor is, can he sustain this level of pull-up jump shooting? Because I do think he's just got traits that translate to every single playoff series and every single playoff game, man.
He was phenomenal in that first round series, and he has to be phenomenal again. This, to me, is the biggest key to this series, is can Ant replicate or come close to what he did last series? Because if he can't come something close to toe-to-toe with Jokic, I don't think he needs to outplay Jokic or even play as well, but he's probably got to play something like a top 5 dude on the planet. Like, he has to be a dog in this series, and he was phenomenal, but there is some stuff where you question, okay, how completely sustainable is that? The strength, the athleticism, the rim pressure, there's no question. The pull-up shooting improvement, we've seen across 3 postseason series now, where he goes up by like 10% as a pull-up shooter. He goes from 44% effective field goal percentage to 55% in this past series. And he was really, really good in this matchup last year. Particularly, he was lethal out of pick and roll. 1.4 points per possession he scored out of pick and roll in this series, which is just absolutely disgusting. And the Nuggets are going to have a challenge there because KCP is awesome, but as we said, he's still a little bit small for that matchup. Aaron Gordon, I think you just need on Karl-Anthony Towns as much as possible, and he is giving up something in terms of quickness. And is going to test Jokic as a rim protector. I think the best coverage is a coverage that the Nuggets really like to play, which is Jokic in high drop. And then you can hopefully force Ant to beat you as a passer. You can force him to try to make those skip passers. He's not super consistent hitting Rudy off the roll. So I think that that is a good coverage. And if he gets red hot, you double outright. And I wouldn't be opposed to throwing doubles at him and making him beat you as a decision maker. You don't start in that place. That's more of a desperation play. But although I think he's mostly been good, you have been able to force him into some turnovers or frustrate him and get him to take some tougher jumpers, throwing those looks at him. I worry pick and roll about him turning the corner on Jokic when Jokic is coming out close to the level of the screen. Like, he's just so damn quick. But I thought Jokic mostly played him okay. It was just Ant being a dog, Ant making big shots. And that's what Ant's capable of doing. I'm not going to deny that. This is definitely a tougher matchup for him than Phoenix, because this team does have better point of attack defenders, and they're ultimately just bigger and longer and more dialed in, more consistent defensively across the board. But he can go crazy in this series. He just has to knock down his pull-up jumpers, and he has to make good decisions. And if he does those two things, he can play like a superstar, and that unlocks an offensive ceiling that Minnesota needs, because they were the best offense in terms of offensive rating in the first round. That was against a bad defense, but this was a Minnesota offense that was average in the regular season. And that was the biggest concern. Do they have the firepower to knock off the Denver Nuggets if they're an average offense? And they played like something a hell of a lot better than that in the first round. And Ant was the single biggest component. They need him to be at that level, or they're not going to win this series.
They also need their perimeter shooting to be at a really high level, too. They shoot 36.6% in their first round series against Phoenix, and floor spacing was crucial. Cat shoots 53%. Ant shoots damn near 44% from behind the arc, which is just dumb, man. I know Naz Reid only shoots 31%, but he's a better shooter than that. I think shooting variance is going to be pretty crucial in this one, too, man. Just in terms of the difference that we get from these teams in the first round. It felt like Minnesota shot about expected from behind the arc. Denver shot well below their means. Denver shoots 30.8% from behind the arc against the Lakers, man. That is nearly 7% below their regular season average, 6.6 to be exact. And then on catch and shoot threes, the Nuggets shoot just 33% on those. And again, this is the Denver Nuggets offense where catch and shooting is traditionally going to be a wide open look for the Nuggets. Like, they generate a lot of those shots. They shot 6.4% below their average catch and shoot regular season average. It was everybody too, man. It wasn't just like one player or one guy not pulling their weight. It was basically everybody. Jokic shoots 33%. Murray's at 29. KCP is at 28. Like, the only guy that shot above 34% was Michael Porter Jr., who they needed to shoot the ball like that in that series, 48.8%. So another big key, and I think you can make this blanket statement for any playoff series ever, is going to be shooting variance. But it's a little more heightened in this series specifically because Denver needs to shoot the ball well. They shot really poorly against the Lakers, significantly below their regular season average. And Minnesota generated a high volume of high-quality looks against Phoenix very consistently, and they shot really well. So I think that's another big key in this series.
Denver is absolutely the better shooting team from beyond the arc. They're not the most high volume, but they just have big time shooters. KCP, MPJ, Jamal, all those guys are consistently year in, year out, 40% from deep. So they do have to be way better than they were last series. That was a big reason that Denver came out down in all those games. They just couldn't make their open threes in the first half. And that's where it becomes, like you said, get the ball out of Jokic's hands. I definitely don't expect Minnesota to do nearly as much hard doubling as LA did because they just have way better options to defend him in single coverage. But like LA was able to succeed doubling Jokic, even though he was making the right decisions, passing out of it just because the guys around him weren't knocking down their shots enough until game 5 when they really did start doing that. I think particularly key is that MPJ is involved in this series significantly and that he maintains something close to his level, because last year, really throughout the playoff run, he wasn't at his best offensively. He still made some really impactful plays, but you just got flamethrower MPJ against LA. That's the MPJ that is absolutely terrifying. He was their second best player in that series, gave you 23 a night on 69% true shooting. And he's just one of the special all-time three-point shooters in the history of this game. Off movement from any angle, any level of contest. He's just water. And you get that MPJ, that is a special weapon to have out there on the floor. Very important. But it's also a reality that Minnesota is going to hound these shooters, and they are going to be willing to run them off the line and funnel them into Rudy Gobert. I think about that possession they had in the final couple minutes against the Suns when they were closing that out. And they ran like 3 different dudes off the line, and eventually they forced Bradley Beal into a turnover because it's just so much length, so much pressure. You have to make decision after decision. You're not getting these open, high-value looks from beyond the arc. That's what Minnesota does to you. And so there may be more of a burden on Denver's guys in those spots. That being said, like the Denver shooters just rise and fire. And MPJ especially, like these are really knockdown shooters. They didn't play like it. I do want to acknowledge, if KCP isn't healthy, then that's terrifying for Denver. He was obviously able to come back and play. And with 5 days off, I expect him to play. But if he's hobbled, if he's not 100%, like, again, he has to draw the Ant matchup. And the downgrade from him into Brown and Watson trying to fill that same role of point of attack defense, but then where KCP is an amazing spot up shooter, those guys are very questionable. Or it's just more Reggie Jackson because you view him as like the first guy off the bench. But the Reggie Jackson experience is stressful and chaotic, to say the least. That would be really, really dangerous for Denver if KCP can't play or if he isn't himself.
I'd have them reeling on the ropes. Like you're close to a knockout there. If you're Denver, they need it. And I'm so glad you said that, because that kind of gets to my final big key for Denver, Minnesota. And that's, will the Timberwolves dominate non-Jokic minutes? And how much really can we trust this bench? There is a huge gap between these two benches in terms of quality basketball players. Like I love the Nuggets starting 5. I think it's the best in the NBA. But the bench, just straight up, Reggie Jackson, Christian Brown, Peyton Watson, and Justin Holiday versus Naz Reid, Nickeil Alexander-Walker, Kyle Anderson, and Monte Morris. That's a very big gap. That is a huge gap. And so that not only does that mean that KCP has to be healthy, has to be up to the task of playing against Ant, like you also have no margin for any injury to any guy. If you lose any player and are expecting big minutes from any of these bench guys, like I said, Denver is reeling on the ropes, very close to, to being knocked out. Like I think if one guy was down or significantly hampered by an injury, I might take Minnesota to win this series, man. It could be that big of a game changer.
Absolutely. Depth is significant here. And there's a counterbalance between the fact that Denver has such exceptional role players in the starting 5. Like they're 3 through 5. Those guys all do their jobs at such a high level. But once you get beyond that, Minnesota has, as we've said, like maybe the 2 best bench players, certainly 2 of the best bench players in this field. Nickeil Alexander-Walker played like 30 minutes a game last series. He was phenomenal. He's a hound defensively. He's knocking down his spot-up jumpers. He's making good decisions with the ball. The guy's a problem. I do think he's going to play less in this series. We didn't see a lot of Naz Reid in the scope of how much he could have played. And we didn't see like a big explosive Naz Reid game. I think that's very different in this series because we saw 23 minutes against the Suns with NAW, Conley, Ant, and Jaden McDaniels all on the floor together. So that is a 3-guard lineup with a 185-pound power forward. You're not doing that against Denver. You're certainly not doing that against Denver's starting 5. They're just so much bigger, so much more physical. So that's where I think you're going to have 2 bigs on the floor probably pretty much all the time when Jokic is out there. I can't imagine that Gobert really ever sits when Jokic is on the floor, just because I think although Cat's good on him, like that kind of depends upon having Gobert in that helper role, in that roamer role. So I think we'll see more Nas. But yeah, two exceptional bench players versus a big old question mark. That could make a difference in this series. Minnesota just has more basketball players who you trust. They were also a lot more consistent last round. Like, just being locked in is a key for this Denver team. Last year in the playoffs, they were the most consistently locked team that there was. They had the highest floor. They came in every game and you knew what you were getting more so than anybody else. Boston was this topsy-turvy experience of floors and ceilings. Denver was going to produce great offense. They were going to take care of the basketball. They were going to compete defensively, and that made them a very convincing champion. First round was different because of the shooting, because of Jamal, but also just because of decision-making, ball security in games 4 and 5. Like, that wasn't the Denver team that we're used to seeing. And simply put, they have to be more dialed in. They have to more consistently play to the level that we know they're capable of, because you had to clutch up. You had to eke out games against the Lakers. This Minnesota team is a lot better, and they are a really tough matchup for you.
And I mean, if they come out, like, they're scrappy, man. They're dogs. Like,
they're crazy. They're crazy, man.
They are crazy, and they're led out by the craziest of men, Anthony Edwards. Like, there's not going to be anything easy in this series. Like,
no.
If you sleepwalk through the first 2 quarters like you did against LA, Minnesota could be beating you by 20. And let me tell you, it's a lot harder coming back against 20 against Minnesota than it is going to be against LA. Like, you're just going to be sitting there crossing your fingers hoping for an offensive lull, which is maybe the one thing, man. I wonder if there's one game or 2 games in this series where we get a bad Minnesota offensive performance. And what I mean by that is very similar to what we saw in game 2 against Phoenix, where all the role players stepped up. Mike Conley has a torrential run. Naz Reid goes crazy. Like, all the little guys step up and do their thing. Cat gets in foul trouble early, doesn't play a whole lot. Anthony Edwards has a really bad pull-up jump shooting game. I wonder if any of game 2 rears its ugly head, right? Because Phoenix didn't offer a ton of resistance. Going up against Denver, where it is going to be a little more physical, they're going to make you work a little more. I wonder if we get a dud or 2 of a game from Minnesota offensively where Denver blows them out, because there is still that advantage. Like, Denver has struggled so much, and that's the thing, man. I don't think we've seen Denver, like, when Denver's played at like 80%, 85% of what they're capable of at their best. Like, I don't think we've seen Denver at their best, and I wonder if we get, a flip of that. Like, that's the best that we can expect out of Minnesota. But we did see that one game, and they eke it out because it's against Phoenix. That's one quotient that I wonder, Carson, that we get in this series, where if Minnesota really struggles to create offense in a game or 2, and Denver just soundly outplays them in those games.
My last key to this series, Logan, is specifically clutch offense. I do believe that Denver is just clearly the better offense in this series. Minnesota played at a super impressive level, but what we've seen from Denver has been so much more sustained. It's, to me, so much more replicable. It doesn't require anybody playing above their means. It's just what they do. And this is specifically the best clutch offense that I have seen in my lifetime. In the regular season, Denver posted a 123 clutch offensive rating. Ridiculous. They were the best clutch team in basketball. Minnesota struggled, posted an offensive rating of 104 in the clutch. In the playoffs, take this with a grain of salt because it's only 9 minutes. It's not much of a sample size, but Denver's a clutch offensive rating of 163. Like, it's just comical how good they've been. Yeah, 9 minutes, but that's how they won these games, right? Oh, unimpressive basketball from Denver, and then, okay, I guess we're just going to run Murray Jokic pick and roll to death. Jamal is going to make all of his pull-up jumpers. Jokic is going to bully you in single coverage whenever he has a chance. Game over. Like, it's just truly some of the hardest offense to stop that we've ever seen. And that's the most dynamic 2-man game that we've seen in a long time. They have the best scorer and passer on the planet, NIkola Jokic. Like, the things they have to lean on. MPJ spot up shooting if you overhelp. Aaron Gordon in the dunker spot if you converge too hard on a Jokic roll or a Jokic post up. Like, it's just so damn good. And Minnesota is going to rely on Ant a lot in those spots. They go to Ant in the clutch. And specifically, when it gets grimy, it's going to be pull-up jumpers. And between the two, which formula do I think is more consistent? Because I'm expecting a lot of close games here. I think these are 2 really good basketball teams. And when it comes to closing out games, Nobody on the planet is better than Denver, and I still think Minnesota has a question mark there. So ultimately, both teams are huge. Both teams are physical. Both teams are awesome. Both teams have a lot of good basketball players. I'm going to take Denver in 6. I thought about going Denver in 7 here because I think so highly of Minnesota, and I'm worried about KCP having the tweaked ankle, but I think the clutch gap is going to matter here. And as much as I love Ant, I can't expect him to be as great as he was last series. And because I'm not super confident in Ant being that, or excuse me, in Cat being that consistent second option, I just think the gap in terms of like night after night offensive brilliance is going to be the difference maker here. Minnesota can make life hard on Denver, harder than anybody else can. But I also think this Denver defense is good. And I do think they're big and I do think they're physical. And I don't think that they're outmatched here. So give me the team that I just trust to create the best shots. This is why I believe in Denver as the title contender. I think they have convincingly the best player on the floor. And I think they have the best offensive formula.
Yeah, I agree. And I think this is also going to be a battle of just two gladiators, man. They're going to go to war here. Yeah, I wrote down my keys to the series. I wrote out how the Nuggets win this series, and I wrote down my list, and I wrote how the Timberwolves win this series. The one that I struggled with to mark off for Minnesota, I wrote Anthony Edwards plays like a bona fide number one superstar. Okay, I can see that. The one that I couldn't mark off, they disrupt NIkola Jokic and Jamal Murray enough. Enough is the key word there. I just don't think it can be enough. And I think this is super competitive. I'm going to take Nuggets in 7. I do think this goes the distance. The team that I trust more to create easy offense, though, is Denver. I just think we've seen it too many times, man. I hate going to this comparison because I always do this with Denver and Kansas City, but I have seen Kansas City do so many improbable things in the clutch situations with their backs against the wall, and I have seen Denver do the exact same thing in these big clutch situations with their backs against the wall. It's boring to pick back-to-back champions. It is boring to pick the same juggernaut to keep steamrolling NBA teams or whatever team. But I'm going to pick the boring answer because I think it's the right one, man, and I've seen the Nuggets do it too many times. So I think this goes the distance, man. I think this is the most competitive series of the playoffs. But I'm going to take the Nuggets in 7.
I absolutely expect this to be the toughest series that Denver has in the West. I think Minnesota has separated themselves, at least based on what we've seen up to this point, from the other teams who we might have thought were on the same level. They were just so consistently outstanding in that series. But again, you don't have those sort of like overwhelming physical advantages, the bully ball stuff that you're doing against Phoenix. Nobody is better built to match up with you as Denver. Same goes vice versa, but it does feel like Minnesota has more boxes to check. I believe in this Denver offense being one for the ages, one of the best we've seen. And I think they can just play much better than they did in that first round. I expect them to. Minnesota can win this series. You get Jamal, if it's the calf strain or if he's just not playing up to his level, because maybe he can't always elevate to the level that he did in the bubble and that he did last year. I believe in Jamal Murray. I love Jamal Murray, but he's been exceptional. So maybe he is more inconsistent in this run. And maybe KCP is hurt. And if Ant balls the hell out, and if you really give Jamal fits with just ball pressure and the athleticism and the length, it can happen. And again, you do match up better physically than anybody else. You're not going to get bullied on the interior like a lot of these other teams are. But I believe in Denver. I have a lot of faith in them pulling through. And I do think they're the better team here, ultimately. Any last words, Logan, before we sign off here?
Naz Reid.
Very fitting. Still a few days until that series starts, but wanted to get out this preview on a night when we only had 2 games. I am excited, Logan. I'm very, very, very excited for Timberwolves-Nuggets. Hope you guys are too, and hope you enjoyed this one. As always, appreciate all of you choosing to listen to us talk about basketball. We really appreciate it. It means the world. If you want more of it, you can check out all of our YouTube content. I did make a video about James Harden today. I did praise James Harden. Have I done it before in terms of dedicating a full video to him? No. Will I do it again? No. He's James Harden. The guy was balling out, and then he laid an absolute dud in this one. Oh, well, watch that one if you want. There's some crazy stats. You won't believe how well the guy was playing before I made a video about him. You can also, of course, watch all of our full shows. You can listen to all the shows across audio platforms. You can check out our merch. Logan isn't wearing the hat today, and I've seen a lot of comments about the jump scare that is Logan's hair being revealed. This is him, baby. Breathe it in, drink it in, love it or leave it. That's Logan Camden. And if you want to join our Discord, you can do so at the link tree across our social media bios. So with that, as always, appreciate you guys. I've been Carson Brabber.
I have been Logan Camden.
And this was Nerd Sesh.